Aston Villa's new signing Ian Maatsen joined the club in June, and his former club Chelsea labelled him as one of their own in a social media post when he left. However, his years at Chelsea and 14 first-team appearances is not really what I'm bothered about. It's these three loan moves that interest me and ultimately are what earned him his move to Aston Villa. Coventry City, Burnley and Borussia Dortmund. In this episode, I'm going to speak to podcasters and journalists who covered Maatsen's time at those respective clubs. So first up is Andy Turner from the Coventry Telegraph. Back then, when he was at Coventry, could you foresee then that he was a talent who was going to go on to be a Premier League player, an international level player?
Yeah, I mean, Coventry have had quite a few loan players over the years, over the last sort of 6 or 7 years, I guess, since Mark Robins come back to the club. And, you know, some turn up and you think, you know, from big clubs as well. And you sort of, you know, the jury's out for a while. But I think, you know, within the first game of seeing Ian Maatsen, you thought, oh, there's something about this kid. He quickly established himself as a fan favourite because he was just so silky on the ball, so easy on the eye, and just forward thinking and just getting forward. And he was exciting to watch. And really one of those players that sort of really got the fans going, really got them excited.
Is he a player that you think can be relied upon at Premier League level now for a full season? Like he's ready, even at the age of 22, to be a first choice left back, left foot, left winger, whatever position he moulds into. He's ready for that now. He's reached that level.
I think so. And I think if you look at his sort of career over the last 3 or 4 years, I mean, there's been this sort of incremental progression, sort of a stepping stone, really. I mean, he had a season with Charlton Athletic in League One. Then he stepped up to the Championship with Coventry and had a really good season in a team which was sort of, you know, trying to get a foothold in the division, really, rather than pushing for the playoffs. The following season, he went to Burnley, and that was a progression again, because although it was still in the Championship, it was a top-end Championship side that were destined to go to the Premier League, and he got promoted with them. So, and then to go to Dortmund after that, and that sort of level of football, I think it shows that there is that progression and I think this is just the natural next step, really, the Premier League. And I think he will do well in there.
Next up is Joe. He's a Burnley fan and the host of the Turf Cast. Joe watched Ian Maatsen play under Vincent Kompany in a title-winning Burnley side.
I definitely think he's ready. It depends what you want to achieve. I think he's good enough for where you currently are. I think he's good enough for... And he's got age on his side as well, so he's only going to get better. So he's probably good enough for where you currently are now and for what you want to achieve in the next few years. If he's got the chance to grow with the club and grow into a very good Champions League defender, fullback, because I presume that's where Villa want to be. Obviously, a club Villa size and knocking on the door and stuff like that. So yeah, I think he's definitely good enough. Definitely good enough for you, and you've got a good deal.
And our third perspective in this podcast comes from Carver, who is a Borussia Dortmund fan based in the US. He hosts the BVB podcast and has supported the club for over 10 years. There's a phrase that we use in the UK, of course, that we say, never fall in love with a lone player. Do you have the same kind of thing? You fell in love with Maatsen and it's a real shame you don't have him?
It really does. First and foremost, I want to say, how dare you guys? Because anyone that has...
How dare we still get the cash? How dare we?
Yeah. Anyone who's ever given our show a spin knows since March I've been saying this player needs to be Dortmund's number one priority this summer. I mean, he has completely galvanized and just rejuvenized this team. We were really, really, really struggling the first half of the season, particularly in the fullback department. We've been neglecting our back line for probably 2 years now, definitely in that fullback department specifically, but Maatsen has came in and just completely changed the game for us. We were looking for him, looks like him to be our number one priority, but we just simply don't have the cash to come anywhere near any sort of English club. And it was kind of game over from us from the jump, unfortunately. But you guys have a real quality player on your hands.
So 18 or 19 years old when he was with you a couple of seasons ago, playing 40 games in the Championship is by no easy feat. Villa fans obviously had a short spell in the Championship a few years ago, so we know how difficult some of that can be. That's something that kind of builds character as well, doesn't it, to be playing men's football, quote unquote, at that level, and to be playing 40-odd games at that age is obviously a sign of just how good you are to have to be to do that.
Well, I think the management team sort of really trusted him. because of what he could do on the ball. And Coventry got a very good reputation for developing young players. They had at the time Adi Vivash, who was the assistant manager and first team coach, who'd come from Chelsea, and Coventry did get a lot of players from Chelsea because of his connection with the club, having worked there for 10 years with the under-18s and the academy players and the development players. But Adi Vivash had this has got this incredible reputation for improving players. One of his biggest successes, I guess, would be Victor Gyökeres. Came to Coventry on loan from Brighton, having spent half a season at Swansea, could hardly get a kick of a game. Came to Coventry from January to the end of the season and looked a bit rough around the edges, a bit rustier. And he came back a different animal. And that season, the following season, he got 18 goals. The season after that, got 22 goals. And it was just, and they sold him for £20 million. And this was a player that they bought for about £1 million. But the progression and the development was incredible and there to see. And, there's so many players that Coventry have developed and got on to bigger and better things. And a lot of that is down to the fantastic coaching. I think there's still plenty more to come. I think that, he's not the finished article, but there's plenty of talent there to work with.
Did he show that kind of level of maturity at Burnley, a player that he's kind of ready to go?
I think so, yeah. Obviously, it wasn't last year that he was at Burnley, it was a year before. So it was definitely good enough for us and was one of, if not the best player that we had. He made the PFA Championship Team of the Year that year quite comfortably as well. I was actually surprised to see that he wasn't in other Championship Teams of the Years like the Who Scored one and stuff. He was by far the best fullback in the league. And you could tell in the first game. I remember in the first game we played Huddersfield away and he actually got the winning goal. And now he didn't score that many goals for us, obviously being a fullback, but he did chip in with a few. But on his first game, he actually played very, very well, coming inside with the ball, using both feet, getting forward. And that's how he scored the goal. He cut inside and fired it into the far corner. But yeah, I think the only negative that he had at Burnley was he sometimes does get caught out, but that wasn't necessarily his fault in terms of quality. That was just a system that we were playing, and I presume Villa will also want to take the game to a lot of teams as well next season with the position that you're in and what you want to achieve. Like I said, establishing yourself properly in the Champions League, and then he will be playing that style. So he can sometimes get caught out at the back. But like I said, that's now 2 years ago. He may have worked on that side of his game at Dortmund and at Chelsea. So he definitely has room to improve for me, but he's already class. Like, in my opinion, he was the player that we missed the most when we went. His company had this weird thing of dismantling the team that won the championship so easily and then replacing him with a lot of new blood. Different for Maatsen because obviously he was on loan, so he had to go back to his parent club. And we did try and sign him. But I do feel like he offered a balance to the side that Charlie Taylor just couldn't offer. And I love Charlie. Obviously, he's just left as well now. But Charlie couldn't get forward as good as Ian. And he couldn't come inside because he was very one-footed, was Charlie, whereas Ian's not as one-footed as Charlie. So, yeah, I think that we missed him the year we went up. But, yeah, just to go back to your original question, I think he showed signs that he was nearly ready a couple of seasons ago. Well, I think now playing in the Champions League for Dortmund and, playing in the Bundesliga, playing against a level up of opposition from quite a few levels up of opposition from when he was at Burnley, then he may well be ready now. And I would suspect he is.
We've talked about and we've heard in this podcast so far about the kind of incremental step up that he's had in his career so far, which sounds like a crazy thing to say for he's only 22, which played a lot of football already. Coventry City were a kind of bottom half championship side. Burnley obviously went on to be a title winning championship side, and then Dortmund obviously Bundesliga and then into the Champions League final, which is excellent. How do you kind of assess the rise that he's had in football so far and the experience that he's gained at Coventry, Burnley and Dortmund has been a progressive step up? Do you now see him as a player who's ready to start 38 Premier League games and be ready again to take on a new level?
I honestly didn't catch too many of his games at Burnley. I know he played in a handful of different roles when he was in the Championship, a little bit more attack-minded, but he was... of course, he's always started as a fullback for us, but he did get very advanced areas quite often. But he was primarily our fullback for us, and I think he's absolutely ready to take that next step of just being at this sort of elite level. My biggest concern from him is just the physicality of the Premier League that doesn't that's not a knock to his physicality or his aggression or his tenacity. I think those are all definitely his strengths of his, but just him being a relatively smaller player. He did get knocked around a little bit here and there, not too much, but I just think that, the Bundesliga is like a level in league that he could have and definitely did thrive in. So I'm curious to see how he holds up to just the physicality of the Premier League. But yeah, and pretty much every other measurable metric, I think he's absolutely ready to take that step. I know Chelsea has a handful of left backs, but I personally, if I were the manager, I'd be definitely fancying him over the ones that they have at the moment.
What specifically do you think he will have taken from his time at Coventry? What will he have learned during that period?
I think just sort of freedom to express himself, so particularly going forward. I mean, he was played in lots of different positions, although primarily he was sort of left wing back at the time, because Coventry played with 3 at the back. But he was played out of position as the season went on, and later on in the season when I think they must have had injury problems, suspension problems, whatever. He played further up the pitch, out wide. He sort of also played as an attacking midfielder in number 10, that sort of stuff. And he just did really well, and he sort of did what he was asked to do, really, and sort of just carried on sort of learning his trade and taking on new responsibilities and relishing those opportunities, I guess, really, to play in different positions. Only sort of the one area where he needed to work on, I guess, was his defensive work, and just sort of getting better at that, really, getting a bit tighter at the back and being a bit more solid. That's, I think, the only thing that you could sort of level at him, really. But going forward, he was a smashing player and is a smashing player and great to watch.
Ian Maatsen at 5'10", I also suspect wouldn't be great in the air. So I'm already looking at that Villa's left-hand side, worrying a little bit about if balls that are going over the top. Yes, he's got the pace to go back and recover. And Pau Torres is a very smart footballer that can see things happening. But in the heat of the moment, neither are going to be great in the air, I don't suspect. Is that an area of concern, do you think, or did you see differently?
Yes, I suppose, but I mean, that's not to say he hasn't got a decent spring on him, but, I don't recall it ever being a shortcoming. I think the only thing was, I think perhaps just his sort of concentration and awareness at the back, really, to make the right, to get in the right position, to make the right tackles or blocks or whatever. As I say, I think the only sort of weakness to his game, or the only area of his game that he needed to work on was just, his defensive work, really. But again, I'm sure, that's 2 or 3 seasons ago. I'm sure since then he will have improved no end on that.
Kind of have to take a little bit with a pinch of salt that was 3 years ago. This is 2 years ago. Dortmund is obviously the most recent example, and we'll get to that in a little bit. The second goal in the Champions League final is a loose pass from him that goes on to Madrid go on to score from. So this is a thing that still is happening for him, a kind of lapse in concentration here and there. But as we said, he's still 22. This isn't a player that's played 500 games. Like, these things are going to happen.
Yeah, they are. He's going to get better. There was a few occasions where he gave the ball away for Burnley. I'm not sure any of them directly resulted in a goal. But again, he's the type of fullback that's trying to make things happen. He gets forward and he's trying to play key passes. So you want your fullback to be doing that. And in them scenarios, you're going to sometimes give the ball away. You mentioned there his height. He obviously, for that reason, isn't very good in the air. I'm just trying to think back of points where he actually won a header. He may have done, but I can't remember one single header. But not many teams play like that anymore, right?
No.
I can't see many teams going to Villa Park and just lumping it up to Maatsen. It's just not what teams do anymore. That style of football might come back in 5-6 years. Obviously, Daesh might do it when Everton play against you, obviously. But yeah, I can't see that being a massive issue, like his height and how good he is in the air. But maybe the lapse in concentration, because like I said, his most recent game, he did do something like that. But I would presume that's going to get ironed out. The better he gets, the more experience he gets. And like I said, he did do it for us. But it's not like, he wasn't like James Trafford levels where he did it every single week. It was just probably once every 3-4 months.
Yeah, and that kind of aerial bombardment, if you like, if someone is aiming long balls over Villa's left-hand side, he might not win the aerial duel to begin with, and not the Pau Torres, but Ian Maatsen certainly has the pace to
definitely
track back and get back in behind and kind of cover for any mistakes.
Yeah, and that's essentially what he did half the time. If when we're playing in the Championship, we're under the cosh a little bit and balls are coming in, he'd back off and just know that he's going to win the race.
Yeah, well, I think that comes with age, right? I mean, you mentioned before how young he is already. I don't think that's necessarily like a a thing I like about his personality or mentality. I think it's just a matter of him being at his age. I mean, a 22-year-old who came from the championship the year prior and is now in the Champions League final. That's quite the jump. And he definitely handled the challenges on a regular basis. Just a matter of just that one really unfortunate slip, because I don't think he had much of any of those other slips this spring with it, the spell he had at Dortmund. I mean, I mentioned before the physicality, or like just, I should say the strength that he has, just as much a small player. That's a concern of mine, but also just, again, him just kind of trying to find his footing as he goes into this next stage of his career, reaching his mid-20s and just, going into those prime years here in the future. But I don't know, maybe it's just me being biased because I loved him that much, but I really don't see too many other weaknesses in this game at the moment, honestly.
Let's talk about better things and his better attributes. Pace, obviously something that is very useful for him, but also technical ability and his ball playing ability is something that is certainly right up there, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. And just on both sides of the ball with his tenacity as well. I mean, he's someone who tracks back really, really well. He has just got so much versatility in him when it comes to just being on both sides of the ball. He's pretty solid defensively, given, again, his size, just the levels he's played at for the years prior, and also playing at so many different roles, sometimes even in the attacking front line. And then when it just comes on the ball, things you mentioned already, his technical ability, he's really underrated with his dribbling. He's got some great link-up play. Him and Sancho did a lot of that in the Champions League runs. He's got a few goals for Dortmund as well, and they were not difficult, or they were not easy goals by any means either. I mean, they were ones where he had to get a shot off quickly, or he had little time and space, and he definitely delivered on those fronts as well. So, I mean, when it comes to just his passing too, I mean, he's got 89% pass completed in the league. He's got a lot of progressive passes too, so a lot of good strengths when it comes to on the ball as well.
He gets forward on the overlap. He's quick, he's skillful, fantastic technique, good technician of the ball, on the ball, and makes things happen. He can cross the ball. He's decent from set pieces, and just really exciting player who makes things happen going forward. He was always confident at taking players on and going past them, and coupled with that, he got a bit of pace as well. So you always sort of get up that left wing and get the ball in the box, or make a really good pass. Just really exciting going forward.
He's got bags of technical ability, and again, a lot of fullbacks do these days. It's probably not something you'd have seen, a fullback doing in 2002, having the amount of technical ability that he does. But he gets forward, he gets back. He's got a very good engine as well. Like I said, he does sometimes get caught out because he's bombing forward, but he never gets caught out because he's knackered. He gets caught out because he's too far up the pitch, because he's trying to make things happen. But again, a coach like Emery might be able to help him with stuff like that as well. So yeah, I think his best attribute is definitely his pace. He can use both feet as well, so he's good at that. But I think his technical ability for me is probably his best attribute. But pace is obviously really up there as well, like you've said already.
There was obviously spells at Dortmund, which we'll get onto later in the rest of the podcast, of him inverting into midfield. I don't know whether he ever did that for Burnley. If he did,
yeah. Charlie just couldn't do that. Again, as much as I love Charlie. Charlie's a traditional left-back sort of style of player, Charlie Taylor, whereas Maatsen's a bit more fluid. And we did that a lot in the Championship. We had him going into midfield and Conor Roberts sometimes going into midfield from the right-hand side, and they both did it quite comfortably. Maatsen more so than Conor, if I'm being honest with you. So, yeah, he's good at doing that. He could probably, under the right manager and under the right system, play wing-back as well, like I said, with his engine and his pace. So, yeah, a lot of good qualities on him. And Burnley fans still miss him to this day. I remember when the Champions League final was on, I put a post up saying, good luck in the Champions League final, which, of course, ended up being jumped on by opposition fans after he made the mistake. But, yeah, a lot of other Burnley pages and podcasts felt the same. I put the same sort of stuff up. So that shows, the effect he had on us. We wanted him back. The club wanted him back. And even a year later, when he's playing in a Champions League final, we all wanted him to do well. I've seen a few Dortmund shirts around the town centre as well over the last year with Maatsen on the back and stuff. So, yeah, a lot of people loved him. And it was a shame to see him leave, but he was one that you just knew would be going on to bigger and better things.
What did Mark Robbins and the coach, if you mentioned the assistant manager a little bit earlier on, what did they say about him? What did they think of his development during that season?
Well, I think they loved him as a character as well, and they knew that he was going places, and they've enjoyed sitting back and watching him flourish, and go on to bigger and better things. I think they knew straight away that he was destined for the top, and destined for Premier League and probably international honours as well. Thought very highly of him, and that's why he played so many games with Coventry. He played 40 games, and I think he got 4 goals. And he was first choice. He was, most weeks. He sort of made that position his own very, very quickly. And he was in the team more often than not.
Mm. What did Company make of him? Obviously, you kind of alluded to the fact that you would like to have signed him, but kind of Company rips up his team and starts afresh in the Premier League. So there's obviously different factors at play there. Maybe he thinks he's going to get a chance at Chelsea or whatever. So it might not just be a purely Burnley/Company thing. But what did the manager think of him during that period?
He loved him. Like every time he spoke about him, he spoke positively. But Company was all about the media and the PR. Like I don't think he ever criticised a player, to be fair. But he obviously wanted to sign him again. Burnley had a bid accepted off Chelsea for about. The reports were 30 million. I'd be very, very surprised if Burnley bid at about 30 million. But we went back in for him. So Company was obviously very keen for him. The board was obviously very keen for him. Chelsea accepted it. But because of the way that we did things, I felt like we should have done it earlier in the window. Like as soon as he's gone back, 1st of July, Ray, Ian, come back to Burnley. We want you back. But because we took so long to decide, by the time we were putting these bids in, Chelsea had already played him in 3, 4, 5 pre-season games, and he was starting in most of them. Then obviously it didn't work out. He didn't get the minutes that he thought he was going to get. I'm not sure if we went back in January, but even if we did, Dortmund or Burnley, he's going to back himself and go for Dortmund. So we did want him. Company was a big fan. He played 39 games for us, which is pretty much there or thereabouts a full championship season, just missing, the odd game here and there. Did pick up a couple of niggles during the season, hence why it's not a full championship season. So that may be a small negative, especially if you're playing, Wednesday, Saturday, Tuesday and stuff like that. He may end up picking a few niggles. But yeah, the fans loved him. Company loved him. The board clearly wanted him back. And like I said, I think him and Teller, if I'm going to be pushed, but I think he was one of the biggest misses for us last season in the Premier League and one of the reasons why we were so diabolical.
Something that I found interesting through doing this podcast and learning more a little bit about his career and the loan spells that he's had is that you could kind of throw an analysis, for want of a better word, on a player from somebody like Chelsea who are kind of notorious for buying up talent and then loaning them out forever is what it feels like, and kind of almost having a bit of a wasted career almost at this kind of loan after loan, never really settles anywhere. Whereas with Maatsen, who's had a very impressive spell at Coventry, steps up again, wins the league with Burnley, steps up again to the Bundesliga and does very well with Dortmund all the way up to the Champions League final. This is a player that's used that time and used those spells to develop, learn and grow. And that can only hopefully speak to his attitude of wanting to learn, wanting to develop, wanting to get better. And hopefully there's nobody better than someone like Unai Emery to kind of nurture that talent.
Yeah, like him, like so many other Chelsea players, I think they're just looking to find a home, right? I mean, I imagine a good amount of them, hopefully at the first team at Chelsea, but it just, with the nature of that club, it just doesn't really seem to be the reality for a lot of those players. But it did look like, I mean, from my perspective, it looked like Maatsen did want to find a home in Dortmund, but unfortunately that didn't pan out for us. And either way, no matter where he ended up landing up, and of course in this case Aston Villa, it looks like he definitely wants to prove himself at a different level now. And being in that same league, I think that's going to give him a little bit more of like that motivating X factor to just deliver and also just compete against a team like Chelsea.
I'm really excited about this one from the things that I've learned so far and the bits I've seen of him play. If you had to kind of have a rough guess at a prediction of how you see his career unfolding, get your crystal ball out, what can he develop into? What are we going to see from Ian Maatsen in Claret and Blue, do you think?
Just a very, very dynamic modern fullback. I mean, I think he fits that profile perfectly. I don't know too much about Unai Emery's tactical philosophy, but I imagine, he is someone who can really see a lot of great talent ahead of him. And I think he will, like you said, nurture Maatsen and make him into the player that we all know he can be. And he's proven that time and time again in just the last year and a half or so, and definitely these last 6 months at Dortmund. So it's going to be exciting either way.
I think he'll hit the ground running. I think he'll be impressive, and I think he'll hold his own. Whether he kicks on in terms of his goals tally, I'm not so sure, because it's obviously a different level. It's going to be harder, isn't it, to get goals? But that's not to say he's not capable of getting goals. He's certainly got that in his locker, and I imagine he will get 2 or 3 goals over the course of the season. Hopefully, he'll get more. But yeah, I think he'll have he'll make a really good impact, and I don't think you'll be looking back in 10, 12 months time sort of thinking, that was a mistake or anything like that. I think he'll be a player that'll sort of fit in effortlessly, really, and the fans will take to quite quickly.
I think he'll be one to watch, definitely. I think he'll do well if Emery trusts him. I think he's capable of playing there for you this season. And I think he will grow along with you. He might not rip the Premier League up next season, and there may be games against the bigger sides like your Cities and your Liverpools where he potentially may struggle, especially if you're getting pinned back. He's better at playing in the other half of the pitch than he is in your own half of the pitch. So if there's games where you're playing against City or Liverpool, it might be smart to leave him out for them sort of games. But when you're playing against your Ipswiches and what have you, where you're expecting to be camped in their half, he will be brilliant for you. And with Emery's style of play, being a bit more positive than certain teams, I can imagine him doing quite well. If he's there for the long term and he's there in 2-3 years, then he might be reaching Premier League teams of the seasons by then if he continues on his trajectory that he's on. But I think he's capable of playing there for you now. I think he's capable of playing in your starting 11. I'm not sure off the top of my head who you've already got there or what the plans that Emery wants to do. But yeah, I think he's capable and he can potentially grow with a club like Villa into a very, very good player, because Villa, like you said earlier, obviously back in the Champions League, want to establish themselves permanently in there rather than just doing a Newcastle and having 1 year in there or a Leicester and just staying there. And I think he can be that player. He can, in 2-3 years' time, still be a good Champions League fullback.
Joe, thank you very much for joining me on the podcast. Really appreciate your insight, and maybe our paths will cross again in the Premier League one day.
Fingers crossed, mate. Fingers crossed.
I don't think neither of us took that very seriously at the end there. Nice one. Lovely stuff, Andy. Thank you very much for joining us on the podcast. We appreciate your insights and your memories, I suppose, from 3 seasons ago. Yeah, nice one, Andy. Thank you for that.
You're welcome. Okay.
Lovely stuff. Carver, thank you very much for your time. Your link to your podcast will be in the description down below for anyone who wants to check any of your work out. I really appreciate you coming on and sharing your insights. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Appreciate it.